Again, greetings, everyone. Tonight is the third in a series of talks on emptiness. Tonight I'll be talking about and we'll be discussing the Nagata Sutta, which is a way of, the Buddha teaches right view in relation to emptiness. It's a really important sutta. In fact, the sutta that we will be concluding our fall retreat with this year. But we'll meditate first for 20 minutes, so find your relaxed meditative posture. Gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And holding your back straight, but not stiff. Your ears aligned with your shoulders, nose aligned with your navel. Holding yourself very loosely, very gently, very lovingly. Allow yourselves to settle into this room. Settle onto your seats. Settle into your bodies. And settle into your minds. And take a moment to be aware of the sensation of breathing in your body. Just get a feel for what that's like. Be mindful of your breath in your body. And while remaining mindful of your breath in your body, notice that thoughts are flowing. We're conscious beings. Thoughts should be flowing. The purpose of meditation is to not be distracted by your own thoughts. So when you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, simply acknowledge that and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. I'll repeat that. When you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, simply acknowledge that and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. Relaxing your thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. And we'll meditate for 20 minutes with callbacks every 5 minutes. relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. If a persistent thought or feeling arises, stay with it for a moment or two. Recognize it as impermanent and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. And we'll meditate for 5 more minutes. Take a moment to notice the quality of your mind. Be at peace with your mind. When you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. So, let's come out and say it. I want to talk a little bit about what happened in Las Vegas over the weekend, because I think it's important to mention it in this context, in this place of refuge. And what I mean by that is our well-focused Sangha. In this well-focused Sangha, we will be free of the often divisive rhetoric that follows something like this. But because of what occurs in this room, we're developing a profound understanding of what an awakened human being taught in reference to these extreme examples of dukkha. I don't want to talk too long about this either, because I want to get to tonight's sutta, but it also relates directly to that. This man, I'm sorry, I forgot his name. The whole process that he went through leading up to the horrible act that he engaged in his mind, he felt that it was necessary. Views of the world, because of his wrong views of the world. And I'm not trying to explain it. There's no explanation except as it relates to dukkha. The point is that he is an extreme example of what happens to a mind that is rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. When the Buddha says the wise know the danger in even the slightest transgression, meaning the slightest deviance from his Dhamma, that's what he's talking about. That's what that type of thinking can lead to when it goes to an extreme form. If you look at it closely, it's certainly born of craving for something to be different, at least in this man's world, and developing a view of the world that he now clung to and created an identity, and that identity was so strong that that's how he acted. Developing the Dhamma, the way the Buddha teaches the Dhamma, we learn the difference between acceptance and approval. So we don't approve, certainly we don't approve of any type of that behavior. But we accept it because we understand where it comes from. It comes from a deluded mind. It comes from the three defilements of greed, deluded thinking, and ongoing suffering. And so the only way we can look at this man is to look at the incredible suffering that he went through, that was his confining place of his mind and what it led him to, and then to look at the suffering around him that he caused because of that. And so the only thing that we can then do, the only response within the framework of the Buddha's teaching, is to take to the Dhamma and understand the danger in even the slightest transgression. And hold compassion for everyone that's there, not just those that were hurt. There's a lot of them, including this man, even though we know we don't approve it, but we accept it because it's part of dukkha. It's part of what the Buddha awakened to 2,600 years ago. So that's all I want to say, and just to put it in that context. If anybody wants to talk a little bit more about that when we go around the room, please feel free to do. I don't want to cut any comments. But while I read this, if you have any questions for clarity, please just ask me. But hold your comments until we go around the room, just so I can get through this tonight. Go over what we finished off with last week, just to lead into this. The last thing we talked about was the Buddha's final words to Ananda. I just love this paragraph. The Buddha told Ananda, "I will not hover over you, but I will remind you again and again of the Dhamma. What is not essential will be gone, and what is essential will remain." That's such a significant statement, and well, let me read this. It's significant as it speaks to the misunderstanding that an all-encompassing, meaning a one-size-fits-all, everything fits into the Dhamma, an all-encompassing Dhamma is useful or effective, or that anything of value is lost in renunciation and developing emptiness and clinging. Meaning, again, going right back to the Buddha's statement, noticing the danger and even the slightest transgression. There's nothing lost in letting go of any type of wrong views or any type of action that is rooted in wrong views. We often make justifications for that and develop strategies, sometimes even within modern Buddhist practice, to maintain wrong views because they seem to fit some type of useful purpose. They don't. What is abandoned is of no value, and what remains is of singular importance. The Buddha is also teaching Ananda how to clearly know that a Dhamma teacher is well grounded in the Dhamma and not seeking to establish themselves, having a special understanding, or has developed special methods, or is seeking to gain followers. In the Buddha's words, and how do students engage with the teacher and the Dhamma in friendliness? When the teacher teaches the Dhamma with understanding and concern for the student's well-being. In other words, a true Dhamma teacher teaches not to establish contradictory practices, but has studied and integrated the Buddha's actual teachings, and now their only concern is for the student's well-being. Is that clear? So anybody who's actually teaching something that they're relating to the Buddhist Dhamma would teach the Buddhist Dhamma, not something that has been adapted. And they're doing that out of concern for their students. Okay, let me get to but is that clear about what I'm talking about here? The most important aspect of the Dhamma is to be authentic to the Dhamma. That makes sense, doesn't it? This is just from the article before I start tonight's sutta. Rather than teaching that all things are interdependent or interconnected or interbe, the Eightfold Path develops the compassion and wisdom to free all beings from clinging to the world by freeing oneself, including a Dhamma teacher from clinging. So, support your well-focused Dhamma teachers. The Kakaya Yanagata Sutta. This sutta is a teaching on right view and also a clear explanation of the common misunderstanding of emptiness and non-duality. The common applications of emptiness and non-duality are extreme or wrong views of existence and non-existence, and create a diluted doctrine of emptiness and non-duality, fixating on these views, and this is the important point, as if they are the only views possible. And that really is the push to create and live in a non-dual doctrine, is to push yourself into a place where you don't even have to consider that your view might be a wrong view, because non-duality explains it all away. That's it. When the Buddhist teachings are fully developed, it is clear that all things in the impermanent phenomenal world are discrete in a practical sense. The insistence on a non-dual doctrine obscures reality and contradicts right view and the entire Eightfold Path. As seen here in the sutta, the Buddha shows that a non-dual doctrine is an extreme wrong view rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. Something's wrong with my Kindle tonight. What's going on here? The simple teachings on dependent origination are used by the Buddha to show what is meant by the Eightfold Path as the middle way that avoids extreme views. Notice that there is nothing in the direct teachings of dependent origination that would imply a doctrine of interdependence, interconnectedness, or interbeing, as these are non-dual teachings rooted in ignorance and wrong view. The world in this sutta is metaphor for the confused and diluted views that result in unsatisfactory experiences. It's often just the word dependent origination, or sometimes that's used saying dependent co-arising, and then the entire Paticca Sutta is ignored. And just because of those words, notice that it's dependent and not interdependent, but just because of the words, a doctrine of interdependence and non-duality is built just on those words, without any reference to what the Buddha actually taught. The Buddha was staying at Savatthi at Jita's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. The monk Akaya Yanagata approached the Buddha with a question. I don't understand right view. Can you teach me how right view relates to the world? Important question, isn't it? Kakayana, the confusion and diluted thinking of the world arises from polarizing views. There is the view of a permanent existence and a view of permanent non-existence, or a non-dual existence. When the origination of confused and diluted thinking is understood and abandoned, from right view, it is seen that non-existence does not occur. When the cessation of confused and diluted thinking is understood and abandoned, from right view, it is seen that existence, meaning permanent existence, does not occur. The world is sustained by attachments, by clinging to conditioned thinking and wrong views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. One who has developed right view no longer clings to attachments or fixated or conditioned thinking or self-obsession. It is understood that stress arising is simply stress arising. It's such a significant line, isn't it? Stress arising is simply stress arising. What the Buddha is saying in a very profound way, stress arising is completely impersonal. There's no me in the stress. In fact, it's only when we start attaching ourselves to phenomena that we're sticking that second arrow and increasing the stress that's inherent in living in the world. Stress arising is simply stress arising. It is understood that stress passing away is simply stress passing away. We're noticing the whole cycle, like Lorna was talking about a few weeks ago. We notice the arising of phenomena. We don't attach ourselves to it. And then we allow ourselves to notice the passing away of it. And once we can see that in all things, there's no self-referential views arising in the world anymore. There's no cause for any further moments rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, because there's no self-referential views attached to anything. We're simply present with the arising and passing away of all phenomena, including, and most importantly, our own thoughts and views. In this, the Buddha continues, in this, their knowledge is independent of other views. Meaning, what he's saying is, even during the Buddha's time, there were people that would cling his Dhamma to other Dhammas. And he noticed the problem with that. He's teaching the monks and nuns the problem with that. Remain and keep the Dhamma independent of other views. The Buddha continues, this is how right view relates to the world. It has to be
Could you just read those two sentences over again?
Sure.
Thank you.
Starting with, in this their knowledge is independent, or before that, with stress. I'll go back.
Their knowledge is independent.
In this their knowledge is independent of other views. This is how right view relates to the world. So he's reinforcing that your view of the world, the only way that it can be independent is to be well integrated and well framed by the Eightfold Path. Right? Is that clear?
Yeah, it's a sentence where he said, we're clinging views onto the Dhamma. Whatever that sentence was.
Let me just go back to the The world is sustained by attachments, by clinging to conditioned thinking and wrong views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. One who has developed right view no longer clings to attachments or fixated, meaning conditioned thinking or self-obsession. It is understood that stress arising is stress arising. It is understood that stress passing away is stress passing away. Meaning that is just a natural consequence of living in the world. In this, their knowledge is independent of other views. This is the right view.
Their knowledge is independent of other views.
Yes. Important sentence, isn't it?
Okay. Yeah.
This is how right view relates to the world. Those are maybe two of the most, I mean, not to take them out of context, those are two of the most important sentences the Buddha ever said, not, in relation to all the other ones.
So the attachment is the attachment people were giving to other views and conditions that they were extrapolating on what the Buddha said?
That's partly what he's talking about. He's also simply relating to any view rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, any view that arises, that we must recognize and abandon that and remain independent of those types of views.
Meaning like, I feel sad. Like that's a view. It's a deluded view. I feel sad.
Well, in the right context, there's times when it's appropriate to feel sad, and there's no self-referential.
Sadness arises, but this I, right? We're attaching ourselves to the feeling.
Yes,
And so we say you're independent of those views. If you're just observing the arising of a feeling state and observing the passing of that feeling state, you're independent of that view.
Yes.
That there is an entity that is solid and fixed and continues through time that is sad.
Well, the entity would arise by having that feeling of sadness and feeling that I shouldn't be sad. In other words, when it's appropriate to be sad and you're able to stay with the arising and the passing away of the feeling, it's appropriate. And it's independent of any other wrong view, such as I'm sad and I shouldn't feel sad, or I'm sad and I'm blaming something for my sadness.
Sad person, that's just who I am.
Yeah, it's a loved one passes away. It's appropriate to feel sad. A self-referential view then might fall into how could that person leave me now, or how could God take this person? Those are all self-referential views. Simply being sad when it's appropriate to be sad and noticing the arising and the passing away of it is being a fully awake and fully mature human being. Again, this points to another misunderstanding that developing the Dhamma means that we don't feel anything. Of course we don't. We're deeply involved in what's occurring. We're mindfully appropriate moment by moment. Good. Okay. The Buddha continues, this view that everything exists is a wrong view, and the view that nothing exists is another wrong view. So it would, a person whose mind is trying to develop a non-dual doctrine, which is, by the way, it's a way of removing all your responsibility for your own existence in the world, will need to find extreme views like that and attach themselves to that. Well, nothing exists then. There's no such thing as a self. Of course, that's a wrong view, but it's a common belief too. And then the materialistic view would be, well, everything exists and there's no consequences for extreme craving, meaning complete sensory indulgence. And there's people that take that view, that, I'm in the world is one big banquet, I should take everything I can get. And, that saying that the one who has the most toys at the end wins. I mean, that's part of that. The Buddha continues, my Dhamma avoids extreme views. I teach from the middle. I teach the Eightfold Path as the middle way that avoids those extreme views. And ultimately what the Eightfold Path develops is an understanding of the ongoing process of phenomena arising and passing away in an impersonal way. We see things clearly without any I attached to it. The middle way shows that suffering originates and is dependent on ignorance. Now that this is dependent origination, from ignorance of Four Noble Truths as a requisite condition come fabrications, mental fabrications. The simplest explanation of what a mental fabrication is an assumption of yourself in relation to the world that is, remember, rooted in ignorance. And everything that follows, that I'm about to say, follows from that initial ignorance. And it's ignorance of Four Noble Truths. Once we end ignorance of Four Noble Truths, this whole chain, this 12-link chain of causation falls apart. There's nothing to give rise to anything rooted in ignorance because ignorance has been vanished. From From fabrications as a requisite condition comes consciousness. Now remember, this isn't some grand cosmic consciousness. This is ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance. From consciousness as a requisite condition comes name and form. Name and form, the Pali word is namarupa. It simply means that I am now putting a label. This is me, to this form. I've become attached to this as me, as a permanent fixture. Remember, rooted in ignorance. From name and form as a requisite condition comes the sixth sense base. So now I've identified as this physical body. Now I'm going to begin to interpret the world through my senses. Makes sense, doesn't it? Now remember that that interpretation is rooted in ignorance and formed from fabrications, from assumptions rooted in ignorance. So anything that follows from that can only lead to further ignorance and further confusion, deluded thinking, and suffering. The Buddha's done, again, just to make the point about dependent origination, because in some of the Buddhist schools, even the Theravada schools that rely on the Abhidhamma, they start using dependent origination as a creation myth, meaning this is how beings come into existence, and there's nothing here that says that, is there? From the sixth sense base as a requisite condition comes contact. That makes sense. I need my senses to make contact with the outside world. From contact as a requisite condition comes feeling, and in this sense, feeling is any type of disturbance in the mind, any type of phenomena that's arising in the mind. From feeling as a requisite condition comes craving. So now I've gone through this process, and this is, you could almost say that this process is outside of time because it happens so quick that a human mind can't even really see the process, although Frank put up a good point before about this. From that initial ignorance, fabrications are formed, assumptions about the world. Once contact now has taken place through this mind rooted in ignorance, my whole life becomes a self-referential point of view. And now I'm craving for existence. I'm craving for experience. I'm craving for sensory indulgence. And this is where the self-referential ego self becomes insatiable. Nothing that happens will satisfy it, will it? We're never satisfied with one piece of chocolate cake. We need the whole cake. No view will satisfy a self-referential ego that's rooted in this process. Is that clear? So then once we create views, and we're spending the rest of our lives justifying these views and piling on to that view to justify that initial craving. The process has been put in motion. From craving as a requisite condition comes clinging and maintaining. I'm now clinging to these views, and I'm spending most of my life just maintaining these views. From clinging and maintaining as a requisite condition comes becoming, and this is that important point here. There's in none of the translations is there a modifier or a qualifier to becoming, and there's a lot of confusion that led to becoming. Hence the name of the book, Becoming Buddha. If we do nothing to interrupt this process rooted in ignorance, then we can only continue to become more ignorant, or experience a life rooted in that initial ignorance. If we do something to interrupt this process of rooted in ignorance, then we can become awakening. And it's really at this point, dependent origination, that we can do that we can either incline our minds towards awakening or continue ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And we create all types of strategies to continue to ignore that initial ignorance, and so continue a life rooted in that ignorance. The Buddha recognized this problem. This is what he considered upon his awakening. How do I get past the common human problem of deluded thinking? If you think about that for a minute, if your mind is deluded, how would you know? And if you understand the nature of deluded mind and how that deluded mind continues to create strategies to continue to ignore its own delusion, how do you get past it? How do you create an initial recognition that, wait a minute, I'm deluded, at least as far as the Four Noble Truths are concerned? How do you do it? You develop the Eightfold Path. That's really the sole reason why the Buddha taught an Eightfold Path. So we could recognize the nature of our own greed, aversion, and deluded thinking. Is that clear? It's an important point. That's why we develop an Eightfold Path.
John, so in that way, it actually is a creation. You're creating a world in ignorance.
Oh, in that way, sure. Yeah, but not the way it's usually portrayed.
No, I mean, not like.
Yeah, and that relates to what we're talking about on Saturday, karma and rebirth. What are we giving birth to in this moment? If our thought process, if our ongoing consciousness is still rooted in ignorance, we can only give birth in this moment to another moment rooted in ignorance. But if we're developing the Eightfold Path and our mind is inclined towards awakening and well framed by the Eightfold Path, then in this moment we're giving birth to another moment that is moving us towards awakening, towards full human maturity. And that's the potential that each moment has. And in what I just said is the entire Dhamma and the entire understanding on karma and rebirth. It's not so much what we might give, the future life that we might be giving birth to. A well-concentrated mind that is well-framed within the framework of the Eightfold Path will give birth to another moment moving towards awakening. And that's the most important teachings on rebirth. Frank, did you have a question or a comment?
I don't know what it is. More like maybe a little bit of insight to what's going on with me. So when I'm in that karma moment of becoming either more ignorant, rooted in ignorance, it's like the referring back to right view. I feel like investigation into what's going on within myself kind of leads me into like right knowledge and right intention,
Yeah.
And then kind of like the Eightfold Path. It's like the inquiry of when I'm experiencing it. And it's almost like I have to, it's an action that I have to take.
Yeah.
So I guess that would fall in the right action, appropriate action.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also part of a right effort. That's how the Dhamma works. We develop from a well-concentrated mind that you're developing, and you're also developing the broader framework of the Eightfold Path to see what's occurring in this moment. And you can recognize, this is the true insight. This is the meaning of insight as the Buddha teaches insight, not everything that goes on. Insight into the impermanence of all things and not self-characteristic, and the resulting dukkha, the suffering that follows, and you just described that. And if you're gaining insight into the not self-characteristic in this moment, the I-making in this moment, and noticing the arising and the passing away of that I-making, the impermanence of it, you're also noticing the resulting stress or dukkha that follows from not recognizing it, from being caught in that cycle.
Craving experience. And
Yes.
It's almost like that feedback loop. Bring either more experience or to be released from that ignorance.
Yes, and when the Buddha describes his awakening in the Nagara Sutta, he talks about getting stuck in this feedback loop of self-referential views bouncing off or being stuck in the loop of that deluded thinking, that consciousness. And so again, that points, how do you know, when you're stuck in that loop of self-referential views, bouncing off of wrong view, being stuck in wrong view, how do you get out of it? A well-concentrated mind in the framework of the Eightfold Path, so you recognize the process that you're putting yourself into. You can, and it's at that point, and we talk about restraint. Nobody wants to talk about restraint. That's the whole point. We recognize it in that moment, and we practice restraint of I-making as it's occurring. And again, that's what the Buddha is talking about, to kakayana, in a general sense, as right view. Right view means we understand this process that's going on.
But just one more thing I want to add to that. At that point, it feels so personal that it's almost like I'm craving a reaction with what's going on with me. And that's when I have to really become tolerant, what I was saying earlier. It's like I have to practice tolerance with that very uncomfortable feeling.
Yes, because the anatta, a self-referential ego self, the only way it can continue to establish itself, especially in that moment, is to react further and continue to use that reaction as distraction from what's really occurring. It's simply further I-making. And remember, you need to be very gentle with yourself when this is occurring, but it's also this process that's going on, this I-making, is like foam on the ocean. There's nothing there. But in the moment, it feels like the only thing that's occurring. It feels like annihilation. But all that we're letting go, and this is what the Buddha is talking about. And remember the context of these three talks. is emptiness. All we're letting go of is ignorance and wrong views. We're emptying ourselves of ignorance. But it's hard sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, let me. Just go back. From clinging and maintaining as a requisite condition comes becoming. From becoming as a requisite condition comes birth. It's at that point. What am I going to become in this moment? I mean, this is something we should be continually asking ourselves, not to the point of obsession. What am I going to become? Do I want to become more of me, meaning that me that is rooted in ignorance? That has, I mean, we all came here for a reason. I don't mean just right here, but well, I'll use it. We all came here for a reason because we felt like something was missing. We didn't quite understand. Maybe our life is going along pretty good, but it just feels like something's missing. This is it. It's because we don't understand what we're becoming. And the Buddha taught a path that we can become awakened in this moment. Forget about eons and eons, which is how it's often taught. In this moment, or at the very least, in this lifetime, we can become Buddha. We can become awakened. How do we do it? We got to be willing to go through some of the things that Frank is talking about. We got to be willing to face all of those wrong views. And when it feels like it's so personal, that it's ripping our heart out, that's the essence of I-making, when it feels that way. What do? Take a breath, be very gentle with ourselves, come back to a well-focused mind, and start seeing that moment from right view. That's what the Buddha's teaching Kakayana here. What's the right view here? If I'm suffering, if things feel so personal that I'm creating great suffering myself, it's because I'm creating great suffering for myself from those wrong views. Okay, let me continue. I'd like to finish this tonight. It's not too late. Continues. From birth as a requisite condition comes aging, sickness, death, sorrow, regret, pain, distress, and despair. What he's saying is that those are common occurrences in life, but we no longer have to react to them in any way. We don't have to avoid them in any way. We don't have aversion to sickness, aging, death, because we understand it's simply part of having a human life. We don't have aversion to regret, to sorrow, like Maura was saying before. It's simply part of having a human life. The Buddha continues, such is the origination of extreme views and the entire mass of confusion, delusion, and stress. The Buddha continues. He doesn't just leave us there. Tells us how to get out of it. Now, Kakayana, from the remainderless fading and cessation of that very ignorance comes the cessation of fabrications. That's the answer to all the problems. From the very, read it again? Thank you. Now, Kakayana, from the remainderless, red of ignorance left, from the remainderless fading and cessation of that very ignorance comes the cessation of fabrications. Everything followed. Remember how we went through dependent origination? Everything followed from those mental fabrications. The Buddha is now showing us how to undo that chain, how to undo the suffering that was rooted in ignorance, dependent on its origination for ignorance. From the cessation of fabrications comes the cessation of consciousness, meaning conditioned thinking. From the cessation of consciousness comes the cessation of name and form, self-identification as this is me, as a permanent fixture. From the cessation of name and form comes the cessation of the sixth sense base. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that when we awaken, we no longer have senses. We're no longer using those senses in an ignorant way to create further confusion, delusion, and suffering. It comes a cessation of that process of using. Matt and Lauren have kind of been having this little sub-talk. The five physical senses and ongoing consciousness are no more relevant to I-making as a heart beating or liver processing. They're simply physical processes. But when we start using those senses to self-identify, that's where we get in trouble. That's where we start creating confusion, deluded thinking, and ongoing stress. From the cessation of the sixth sense base comes the cessation of contact. From the cessation of contact comes the cessation of feeling. Obviously, it doesn't mean that we no longer are feeling human beings either, but we're no longer reacting to things. That's the feeling that the Buddha is referring to here. From the cessation of feeling comes the cessation of craving. Since we're no longer reacting from a self-referential point of view, from a point of view rooted in ignorance, from a wrong view, there's nothing to give rise to craving. That's the essence of a calm and peaceful mind rooted in equanimity. Remember, Frank mentioned Bahia, the Sutta on the mindfulness of Bahia. The Buddha reminds Bahia that when there is no you, there is no you anywhere. In what is seen, there is only the seen. In what is heard, there is only the heard. In what is cognized and what is realized, there is only what is cognized. And then for you, there is no you here or there or anywhere else. It's such a great sutta. That's what the Buddha is talking about. There's no, and it doesn't mean there's annihilation of self. This is another thing that people misunderstand. When you let go of all these wrong views, it feels like annihilation. But what happens? Look to the first refuge of the Buddha. Siddhartha Gautama achieved this in his lifetime. He became awakened. He became Buddha. He didn't vanish. He didn't lose the ability to function in the world. In fact, he lived the most important and engaged life any human being ever lived, free of I-making. So it just points to the understanding that we don't lose anything of any value. We just lose wrong views. We empty ourselves of ignorance. From that emptying ourselves of ignorance, we develop the ability to become Buddha, to become awakened. From the cessation of contact comes the cessation of feeling. From the cessation of feeling comes the cessation of craving. From the cessation of craving comes the cessation of clinging and maintaining. When there's no longer any craving for a self-referential existence, there's nothing to generate those feelings of clinging and attachment. From the cessation of clinging and maintaining comes the cessation of becoming, meaning becoming more ignorant or giving rise, giving birth to another moment rooted in ignorance. From the cessation of becoming comes the cessation of birth. From the cessation of birth comes the cessation of reacting to. I'm adding my own little comment in here. Reacting to aging, death, sorrow, regret, pain, distress, and despair. All of those cease. Such is the cessation of this entire mass of stress and suffering. The Buddha continues, now this, he's addressing the whole group now. Now this, monks, is a noble truth of stress. Birth is stressful. Aging is stressful. Death is stressful. Sorrow, regret, pain, distress, and despair is all stressful. Association with the unbeloved is stressful. Separation from the loved is stressful. Not getting what is wanted is stressful. These are all common human occurrences, aren't they? The Buddha concludes that, in short, the 5 clinging aggregates are stressful. The 5 clinging aggregates simply describe the ongoing personal experience of suffering. And there's a lot of information on the website, and I talk about that here often, and it's also in the book. And this, monks, is a noble truth of the origination of stress. Remember dependent origination here. The craving that makes for further becoming, that keeps that cycle going. Accompanied by passion and delight, relishing now here and now there, establishing yourself everywhere. Isn't that a great line? Relishing now here and now there, meaning craving for sensual pleasure, craving for becoming, and even craving for non-becoming, that craving for that non-dual, let me get rid of myself because I'm so awful. Let me find a way to establish me in nothingness, craving for non-becoming. And this, monks, is a noble truth of the cessation of stress, the remainderless fading and cessation, renunciation, relinquishment, release, and letting go of that very craving. Nothing magical, mystical, or esoteric about that, is there? Letting go of that very craving. And this, monks, is a noble truth of the way of practice leading to the cessation of stress. What do you think it is? Precisely this noble, here's the Buddha. Put yourself back. We are now 2,600 years ago, and you are there. Precisely this noble eightfold path. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. That's the end of the sutta. I'm not going to read the rest of the article. I'm going to read a little bit more. Everything that Buddha taught for the 45 years of his teaching career was taught in the context of the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths simply states that dukkha occurs as a common consequence of human life. The Second Noble Truth teaches the origination of dukkha. Craving originates and clinging perpetuates dukkha, stress and suffering. Craving for self-establishing existential experiences arises from a misunderstanding of impermanence, the not self-characteristic, and the resulting unsatisfactory experiences. And one of the things that's most remarkable, it's not most remarkable, it's pretty remarkable, is the strategies that an ignorant mind will continue to employ to ignore that own ignorance, including creating all types of adaptations and accommodations to the simple path of liberation and freedom. As the Buddha said, he concludes this with saying, it's the Eightfold Path. And it's craving that's the problem. It's craving that continues to establish self-referential views. It's craving to continue to develop strategies that would ignore ignorance. And remember how we talked a lot about, and the Buddha refers to this, to be mindful of what you associate with, because what you associate with, another word for association, is clinging or attachment. What and who you associate with, particularly as part of Dhamma practice, is going to determine the experience of your life. And that refers to just what the Buddha is teaching Kakayana and the group of monks and nuns over there. Develop right view. Develop that understanding that this is something that is pure, and it cannot be altered or adapted in any way if it's to be effective. So that's tonight's talk. Thank you. That concludes the talk on the 3 talks on emptiness. I'll put this talk up probably tonight or tomorrow, and all 3 of the talks will be in one player if you want to review them. Any questions or comments on tonight's talk, or even on the 3 talks that we've gone through this past 3 weeks? And we'll go around. You understand emptiness? And it really is that, just to put the fine point on it, that when the Buddha refers to emptiness, he's talking about emptying ourselves of clinging, emptying ourselves of ignorance, and he taught an 8-fold path on how to do that. Matt, good to see you tonight.
Good to see you, John. Good to see everybody. I keep coming back to these a couple different thoughts or ideas that have come up from these talks. And one is that the self is fabricated through an observable process.
Yep.
So that through wrong view, we're making ourselves and making our world moment by moment by moment by moment in relation to our attachments, in relation to our feelings, in relation to our thoughts, in relation to our mental fabrications. And thus, the 5 training aggregates, thus a self that suffers. And then the other thing that I was thinking is that from the Kuna Sutta, from the first sutta that we went over this cycle, was that what the Buddha was talking about is empty of what isn't there.
Yeah.
And that what isn't there is ignorance.
Yep.
What isn't there is attachments to a self that suffers. Okay. So those 2 things just kind of keep bouncing around.
Thank you. Yeah, we initiate the process ourselves, and the important point of that is because we initiate the process, we can bring it to cessation ourselves. We're not dependent on any outside agency at all. It's all up to us, and it's all up to how we think and how we view ourselves, like Frank was talking, how we view ourselves in relation to this impermanent world. And if it's rooted in wrong view, we're going to suffer. If it's rooted in right view, we're going to flourish. So it really is. And it's that simple to develop, but that's it. Ron, good to see you.
No, what you just said was the first 2 lines of that sutta.
Was it?
What those first 2 lines was, what is essential remains, what's unessential is no longer present. So, and I was I thought they were great lines, and I was kind of pondering what that meant. And that's, I think, what that means.
In a very profound way. Thanks for bringing up, sorry to interrupt you, Ron. And what we need to ask ourselves is, what is essential to me? Are wrong views essential for me to maintain myself? No. I'm only maintaining a life rooted in ignorance. What's essential is the Eightfold Path. Again, the Buddha's teaching the importance of looking at this path as what is essential and leave the rest of it out of it, because it's only going to continue distraction and deluded thinking. What's essential? What's essential is understanding. The only thing that's really essential is the truth, the Four Noble Truths.
And like Frank was saying, there got to be something that interrupts that non-essential activity.
Yeah. Again, that's why the Buddha developed an Eightfold Path. Even in the Buddha's description of the Nagara Sutta, I don't know if I'll get to this. I've been talking about this for a while. I'm going to teach the Nagara Sutta, but it probably won't be for a couple of weeks because I have other things scheduled. But even in the Nagara Sutta, the Buddha then described how he engaged with the Eightfold Path to extricate himself from those confused, deluded views. You know, and it really is remarkable. And so that's what he taught. He taught this simple, direct Eightfold Path, a meditation practice that is solely the sole purpose to deepen concentration, so that we can support the refined mindfulness of the Eightfold Path that gives us insight into the three marks of existence, like Frank was talking about. Ron, sorry about interrupting.
Yeah, this whole idea, for a long time, my standard reaction to a lot of things that upset me was to ask myself, is this important right now for me? And, you know, just about always, no, you let it go. It still works.
Yeah.
Is this essential? Is this important? Especially with stuff that upsets you, that disturbs you somehow.
Yeah.
To have the presence of mind to ask, is this important? Do I really need to be disturbed by this?
Yeah, need to be. It's a good way of putting it, too. To see those things in relation to the truth. This is not me. This is not mine. This is not who I am. This is not myself. It's simply what's occurring. Thank you. Greg, good to see you tonight. How are you?
Good to see you, John. Very well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, so as far as relates a bit to this particular talk, as everything always seems to be in a good time and manner to coincide with things in my own life. I just feel like I keep having this feeling of I am undergoing a personal transformation, and like it's very, very I making and I building and I maintaining. A lot of the thinking I've been doing lately, but I think it's in the right context, and it's weird. It's a weird kind of feeling. Because even just talking about it, I keep using, I'll just, in my head I'm saying it, it's just I, me. But I have been trying to experience things more lately as things occur, even in my own head. I'm angry, I'm hungry. This is an occurrence of hunger. This is an occurrence of, these different emotions, trying to see them as all these things coming together to form these feelings and trying to really observe it. I also find myself kind of blanking out though, and just staring. I work with kids and they've caught me, they're like, what were you just thinking about? I'll tell you, when you're a little older. But yeah, there's a lot going on right now. And a lot of it, I think, is because of the Sangha and the reading I've been doing and putting everything in context and everything kind of coming together. But it also has this strange feeling of almost reinforcing the eye-making. So that's kind of what I'm struggling with at the moment.
Yeah, it can feel like that. When you start integrating the Dhamma, you can kind of lose your equilibrium. If you think about that, you're going from one way of looking at the world, a wrong view, to a completely different view. And so it can be unnerving, and it can lead to a little bit of grasping. But don't be too concerned about seeing things like, I'm developing the Dhamma, or I'm meditating better, whatever it might be. We're human beings. The Buddha taught the Eightfold Path. One of the ways that applies as a middle way is it allows us to be human beings while we awaken as fully mature human beings. We have to be where we are. We can't want to be anyplace else. In fact, if we try to be, that's one of the traps of conceptual spirituality. We're simply here. We're developing it. And even during ongoing eye-making, the Eightfold Path directs us in the right direction, and eventually we recognize all of it. So one of the reasons why I say be very gentle with yourself, all of us, while we're developing this, is that reason, so we don't judge ourselves too harshly. And there's a path that we have to walk. And as long as we maintain the integrity of the Eightfold Path, if that's the framework for our life, the awakening is assured. As long as we stay within, it's a true meaning of being a stream enter, meaning we've entered the stream that's carrying us towards awakening. Of course, we can jump out of the stream at any point and continue ignorance, or we can continue the Eightfold Path and awaken. I'd say you've done pretty good. Glad you're here. Tim, good to see you tonight.
Good to see you, John. Good to see everybody. This sutta, to me, is something that I think is like the proverbial smack on the head saying, hey, if you get lost in anything, kind of read this. It kind of brings it back to really a lot of the core ideas. Yep. And, the sutta kind of verifies to me the middle way, how all these extreme views are almost like temporary insanity. When you get angry, if someone cuts you off in traffic, it's almost like you're like temporarily for that moment a little insane.
Yeah, it is.
Because it's an extreme reaction. So the sutta pops into your head or my head, and it's like, and so I know what Greg's saying too about the eye-making, but what I've been doing that's helping me is you recognizing I am here, and all these thoughts and these feelings and these ideas, using the Eightfold Path as a framework, and asking yourself, in a quick way, is this the right view? Is this have the right intention, right effort, and all those things? And it's a nice path to drive on,
Isn't it?
And this sutta really, for me at least, I don't know how it is for others, just it's crystal clear, and on the other ones that we talked about on Saturday, it has a whole other, but on this particular one, it's really, really pleasant.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the Buddha awakened to dependent origination. That's what he awakened to. From ignorance through these links, suffering arises, and he taught the Four Noble Truths on his very first teaching. So everything the Buddha taught was in the context of Four Noble Truths, explaining dependent origination. And he didn't just teach it, just once. This is another example of him teaching dependent origination over and over and over again. It's usually referred to, just the Paticca Samuppada Sutta, but there's no telling how many times he taught dependent origination in the context. Think about the context that he taught it here from Kaya Yanagata's question. What's right view? A right view is developed through understanding dependent origination. Thank you. Carrie, good to see you tonight. How are you?
Good to see you. Thank you for the teaching.
Welcome.
Glad to be here. I've been trying to get back here since last week, so
You made it.
practice at home is going better.
Great.
5 minutes goes really fast now, so that's good.
That is.
So I'll start increasing that time.
Good.
But that's really all I have.
I'm glad you're here. Mary, good to see you.
I think when you're going through the experience of trying to balance that I'm making, one of the things that's always been helpful is that whole put your mask on first. Like the first time someone advises you that in your life, you're like, and the first time I heard that, my mother was telling me to take care of myself, and I had a newborn, and it, I'm supposed to take care of myself first, but that's good advice.
Yeah.
So as you're going through this process and trying to find balance between the eye, and I'm getting healthier. Remember, you're putting your mask on first, and that's okay.
Yeah.
My practice is going very well. The speeches are really great. I think, even today I had a day where I had to interrupt it many times, just falling back on old, work behaviors of reacting to an email, responding to a project list, just the myriad of things that trigger me into concern or panic or even, how did I even get this job, those kind of moments. But I'm much better at interrupting that unhealthy thinking. I used to think that was thinking that motivated me.
Yeah.
But it's not, it's not right view. Trying to get back into right view, it's a struggle still. But I can see it, I can catch it, I can interrupt it, I can step back, and breathe, and that's the beginning of interrupting that cycle. And that's really, I'm not always successful with it, and today was a struggle, but I know what to do, I know how to recognize it. Sometimes I recognize it earlier than other times. But the integration, that train has left the station, like you said, it's going to happen, right? You have to be positive about, just for the sake of awareness and being able to catch things within yourself, you're on the right path. And the incorporation of the, Four Noble Truths of the Eightfold Path is just a good baseline to check yourself against when you're having those feelings. So, kind of a difficult day, but one that I pull the tools out of the toolbox to try and make it a good day, So, it's all fair.
Wow. Thank you. Mary, what's remarkable about what you said is that you're thoroughly integrating the Eightfold Path into the mundane aspects of your life, which is really the difficult challenge. We almost don't feel like we should be bringing the Eightfold Path into the work situations, but that's precisely where we should. And what you're describing is integrating the Eightfold Path as a framework for your life. You're seeing things from the perspective of right view. Thank you for sharing it. It really is remarkable. It's how it works. Mary Beth, good to see you tonight. How are you?
It just feels good to be getting back into the conversation and just really aware how I really forget and fall back into all this stuff and behaviors. And I guess that's part of, just being a human being.
Yeah.
Just craving for it to all be gone. But yeah, I'm just glad.
Yeah, we all are. Glad you're here tonight too. Good to see you. I'm going to talk a little bit again about our Dhamma project a little bit more. Good to see you tonight. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very good. Good to be here. I've heard it said before too that there's a skillful use. We talked about it a couple of years back. I remember. I was sitting over there when I said it. That there's a skillful use of Tanasara, who says there's a skillful use of anatta a skillful use of self in an awakening process. So I'm sorry, that's the
Greg.
gentleman with the, Greg, hi Greg. That I heard you say in the right, but I'm putting it in the right context, you know. So to not get, like I can get myself caught up in, oh, right, you have to say I. Like we live in a world that has a placeholder, but there's a right view. We're seeing this process unfolding with, you know, right view, right intention, and you know, it would be like impossible to talk. I've tried it to try to like it's all tied up, and like, you know, the Dhamma becomes this noose that we can't. It's not, you know. Anyway, I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but you know, but there is a skillful use of an awakening self that is progressing along the path and is integrating parts, and we can recognize it, and it's motivating to see that our perspective is transforming, and we're feeling freer to be, like he talked in this sutta about independent, and it's such on the, you know, on the mundane level, whatever, it's such a greater way to experience the flow of time. We said about, you know, bringing Dhamma into work or not, but I think most of us, we spend an awful lot of time working, so that's where we see the manifestation of the integration of the Eightfold Path. And I've been, like, personally in my practice, I'm really trying to watch sensations a lot and where they drive my actions, and like observing it more. And you know, I talked about this a couple weeks ago too. Like I just feel so much less fatigued at the end of the day, and I can tell when I'm feeling fatigued. Like there's a strong self that's trying to assert itself in either one way, craving for something or, you know, being aversive to what's occurring, trying to annihilation. That's why I say like non-becoming, like this can't be going on, you know. And like, oh, I can just let it go. It's like really, I'm like, okay, keep driving, whatever it is. So I've been, so the other like little insight that I keep noticing is all the sensations that I got for one thing are actually, they're confused themselves or something. I'm confused in the way that I interpret them. So I don't know if that makes sense, but like hunger, what I always thought was hunger, it's often not hunger. It's a lot of just restlessness and like really being curious about those little sensations. Like, oh, that's a movement, but I always thought it was hunger. It's not really hunger. It's this, whatever. So with a lot of things like that, it's been very interesting to feel free. I don't just sit and rest and observe what's occurring and be embodied. That's all.
Thank you. Yeah, the conundrum of I making in the Dhamma is solved by the framework of the Eightfold Path. If whatever we're engaged with is framed by that, there's no I making there. But I have to do it, don't I? Frank, good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to be here. My meditation practice is good. I kind of connect with what Mary said. I think we all have busy lives. I have a lot on my plate, and for the most part, I'm pretty good with interacting and integrating, you know, and being the team leader and making decisions, and all day long it seems like, you know, and being a father to 4 new young people, and still being there for my own children and my spouse. And not that it's overwhelming, but I think I really pay attention to my approach to things, and then with that, what action I have, you know, and the method of how I'm doing it, and then my attitude on how I relate to those things that are challenging. And I have arguments, like Mary said, with how did I get here? What am I doing? And it leads me into a state of mind that I'm in, sometimes in denial, or I'm pretending that it's good, or that I'm wishing that it was something else, or how I'm going to fix something. Using mental mechanisms on how I'm going to bring about an entirely different change in things, and I'm just like, it's exhausting, and it's a constant pull and struggle, you know. And I get it. I'm like, but somebody has to make decisions. You know, I can't live a monastic life, which I would love to. That's my goal. I told my wife, I'm going to give everything that I know you guys, just maintain everything, and I'm going to go live in the mountain in a little tiny cabin and stare at waterfall all day. I'm going to pick herbs, and I'm going to like just cook them over an open stove and just like hang out with the deer and chill.
Can I come with you?
Yeah, exactly. I have these like little, you know, and it pulls me from living in the here and now, you know. So, I mean, a strategy that I've been using lately is a personal inventory of where I'm at. And I could restart a day at any point, you know. And no matter what time it is, I could just go take a breath and restart.
Yeah.
So
Let the eye out.
that's all right.
Thank you, Frank. Lauren, good to see you.
Thank you. Good to be here. Good to see everyone. Again, every time we touch base with dependent origination, I get a little bit more out of it than I have done tonight. And it happens every time we do the rundown of dependent origination. So I've got a little bit more out of that again. I also, these are just sort of like, I don't know if the mental fabrications or not, but when you meditate, just to keep in contact throughout the day with your mind, your quiet mind. If you can think of when you meditate, and as you say at the end of the meditation, oh, I love your new meditations, by the way. I've been using them.
Oh, good.
Yes, they're excellent.
Good.
I've been using a 30-minute one.
They're highly advanced meditation. No, it won't be good for all of you. I'll talk about it in just a second.
Yeah, it's very good. You say at the end of the meditation, you notice how quiet your mind is and things like that, and you just wish you could just hang on to that all day. I've thought that if you could think of that quiet mind as your home, that's where your home is for your mind, that's your home. And throughout the day, the idea is not to get drawn away from home by by the events of the day and
Cabin, waterfall.
For the 10th time.
what do you call all this stuff? Life. No,
Distraction.
Phenomenal.
Phenomena. Thank you.
Of course,
And
Liz.
don't let your mind be dragged away from the home by phenomena. You know, whether it's however it's received through your senses, whatever. But try and keep located to home in your mind in your meditation practice. And I also thought about thinking about time and the way we divide time up by the months of the year, the days of the week, hours of the day. And really, this is how something in the West we think of time, the days of the week, and the months, like that. And that draws you away from what really is happening. It's the passing of time that is the important thing. And the ongoing passing of time is time, not the days of the week. For instance, if you were asked some people to say, is Wednesday related to, is it connected to Sunday? Is Wednesday connected to Sunday? They'll say no. It's absolutely connected. It's all the passage of time, and it's a passage of time is really what we should be focusing on, not the days of the week or the months of the year, etc. So I kind of thought about that. I think I've run out of thoughts right now.
Thank you. All conditioned things that arise are subject to cessation. Bingo, you got it. So, just to get a little personal, I don't think you'll mind. I remember a time when you really struggled with dependent origination, but you stayed with it, and now you see that it is the fundamental teaching. It's from ignorance.
It's absolutely
Yeah. You really can't. Buddha said this to his cousin Ananda. Ananda was being a little flippant about his understanding of dependent origination. The Buddha kind of scolded him, and then concluded by saying that this is profound. It's very deep.
Yes.
And if you're going to awaken, you have to understand it. And eventually Ananda did. But.
I get emotional. I literally get emotional when you go through, and I get emotional.
Wow. I think I do too. It's inspiring because in the moment you're realizing this really is the problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you get it, and again, it does take, I'm saying this if some of you don't quite get the importance of dependent origination, it takes a while to really see it. And the reason why it takes a while is because of the strategies we develop to continue to ignore ignorance. There's nothing really difficult in dependent origination, but I can tell you the first 6,000 times I came across it was like, but now I see it just how, I think I see it just as the Buddha saw it, from ignorance.
I know the first time I heard it, but I'm sure I heard it many times before I actually heard it.
If there's one teaching that the Buddha teaches repeatedly, and he teaches a lot of things repeatedly, the most is dependent origination in different ways in different sutras. He didn't, he didn't teach us just once like most people would say. Thank you. Liz, good to see you. How are you?
Good to see you. Really good to be here and good to see everyone.
Yeah.
And thank you for acknowledging, what happened yesterday and putting it into a little bit of perspective. I think that it shows my unenlightenedness because I struggle with the way of rationalizing and thinking about it. But, and that's the second and the third era of everything that happened. But thank you for bringing that up. And thank you for reminding us all of how simple this is. It's right there in front of us. I find myself, that I'm making a relationship between what you say about the freedom to choose what you want to think when you want to think it. So I'm, during the day, checking in with myself. And if I'm thinking about something that is sort of taking me down a path I shouldn't be going down, I replace it with thoughts of the Dhamma. And it just reinforces everything with myself. Maura said this, a while ago. She said, I think about the Dhamma all the time. And I thought, wow, yeah, okay, let's do that, And so I started to replace thoughts that might have in the past moved me to an anxious state, a state of judgment, a state of what happened yesterday, what's happening tomorrow, and then replacing it with the skillful use of the Dhamma, which I know I say that all the time, but it's the skillful use. It's like I've been coming long enough. I know I don't always do what I need to do in the moment, but when I can take the time out to think about the Dhamma, and just let it sort of mull around in my mind, there's a certain amount of skill there.
Yeah.
That's developed over the years that I've been coming, the 25 years that I've been coming to.
It's a passage of time.
Yes, it's not a day or a week.
Stay for the summer.
It's the moment to moment time that I've spent coming. But it's and I've said this before, you spend so many years defending this object that sits in the space.
Yeah.
And the freedom that comes from realizing that you no longer need to defend it in the way that you were defending it or in any way. I just keep thinking someday I'm going to have so much time because my mind's going to be free and I don't have to defend this and, so much time, so little to do. But anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of time at that cabin by the waterfall, I think.
It sounds pretty good.
Using that word skillful is very skillful. The Eightfold Path can be seen as 8 specific skills to develop to end dukkha. These are 8 very useful skills to employ in the strategy against continued eye-making, as a counter to the strategy of eye-making. So thank you for bringing that up. Bonnie, good to see you.
Good to see you here and saying how someday the light goes on over here, somebody says one thing and it registers in a different way. But one of the things that I've been really looking at is how I am in the stream. It's like being caught up in, I have all these ocean tonight, as you see, I think that's, like I can see myself getting caught up in the fabrication, and it's like the undertow, and so I have to swim really hard to get back, because I can see it, and I can see what I can, the intention, or whether it's speech or the view, any of them, throw a rock and hit any one of the Eightfold Path. It could be present in there. So hopefully that I work towards being closer to the event of the undertow. Because sometimes I'm in it and I know that.
Don't fight the undertow. Go with it.
Well, and that's for trying to, and it's been so useful, the idea of letting something arise and not having to change it, and know that it will fall away. And I think it's been useful for so many reasons in my life. But the other thing is that because it's like also again, go to the bottom of the ocean, and I'm not sure if it's the body who stands in it or there's a pull with it. It's sort of like I see a lot of images. Finally, the bottom of the ocean gets still and it's all quiet. It's very clear and everything is fallen away. And all it takes is a little fish or some big fish or something that goes by and it stirs it all up, and to not get caught up in it again, that to not have to fabricate. It's been really, for me, concentrating on the idea that it really is fabricating around all these other things, and to trust some of the emptiness, that it's okay, that again, there isn't anything I really need to do, but you would work on. Yeah, so anyway, so it's like, being present, not always having enough skill to totally, in the moment, be Buddha, but, but to be wise enough
sometimes do enough to visualize.
Yes.
Yeah. The Buddha did that a lot.
Well, that's the restraint too. I'm practicing that in all kinds of ways, but sort of. There you
I
have
think
it.
Yeah,
also,
thank you. That's an aspect of right speech, is to know when to do, and right action, to know when to not do anything, when it's just unskillful.
we've sort of been storytellers for so long. You know, it's part of the artwork that I make is telling the story. It's hard to, it's helpful to use the skills of the Dhamma to separate myself from the story that I'm telling. And looking at it in another way, even though my artwork is very personal, but looking at it in another way where it doesn't have to create more dukkha. It can just be
Yeah.
the story that I'm telling.
Yeah, that's a
We
good.
were talking about that and how that's become as we get more involved in studying the Dhamma. How for
Those
me,
stories are changing.
and where are we in relationship to those things? It feels different, and the way it feels maybe strange or painful
Or passive.
So do you know how the story ends?
Pardon me?
How does the story end? In emptiness.
Yeah.
No more views, no more story. What a great class. Thank you all. So, a few announcements before we meta. The meditation, the guided meditations are now on one page. There's and they're on one player. And there's meditations from 5 minutes, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, and 45 minutes. And there's also 2 meta meditations all on the same page with instruction, rather than spread out. And thanks to Anthony, who comes on Saturdays usually. He said, why don't you put a 30-minute one up? So I decided to do that, and that just led to the other ones. So they're up there now. Our retreat's coming up 2 weeks in a few days, 2 weeks from Thursday. There's a couple of beds left. If you're going, sign up. If you still owe some money, please get it to me within the next week or so I can, because I got to bring some cash up there. And our Donna project for this year, I know I promised to get the web page up soon. I will. Pardon me?
I promise to get you something too.
Okay, so there, I'm waiting on Mary now. But it's a Raritan Learning Cooperative. It's just a wonderful alternative high school in Flemington that Mary Beth is running. We talked a little bit about it. It's gotten late. But I will put a web page up on it, and we're going to start doing some things to support Mary Beth in that wonderful school, I think. So, and Donna Dinner. The Donna Dinner is the Tuesday of Thanksgiving week. The 21st. The web page is up on Cross River Meditation website. We need some volunteers like last year to help set up and clean up at the end of the night. I'm going to get a basket. We need to collect a little bit of money so we can pay for the help there, for the dishwasher, etc. So Julie doesn't have to bear that cost. She's been so generous with everything. And then some suggestions for gifts. I think we're going to tie it in with Mary Beth's going to give me some ideas about some practical gifts that they can use there too. But that's all up on the website. So put that night aside. It's for everyone, not just our Sangha, but your family, your kids, and anybody in the community. It's a great party. So, all right, we'll finish with metta, as we always do. Define your relaxed meditative posture. Gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body. And let that mindfulness of your breath cease any distracting thoughts to the past or to the future, or that may have arisen from our talk tonight. And give me just a second to get to metta. There it is. And let's keep in mind with metta means goodwill and love and kindness for everyone. So let's hold in mind that that poor gentleman that did that awful thing in Vegas, and all the other people involved there. I mean, this is really what Metta's for. So these are the Buddha's words on Metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding, not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class. Peace.